my only news from the week is I rode a mechanical bull this weekend and I did a good job. I think I was on there for like somewhere between 45. I was on it for like 45-ish seconds, I think.
That's good.
Was very good. And I also was in my Halloween costume, so that was fun. That's what I did this weekend.
I was in a play where I reenacted The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, and I was the man who kills his wife because he's in love with his cat.
Because I was Banicula for Halloween. You can see my costume on our Instagram account.
Did people get that it was Banicula?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, people got that it was Banicula.
I like that. I'm not familiar with Banicula, and at first I was like, well, you sent the picture of the Banicula cover, so I was like, all right, this is what it is. But I think zero context, I would have been like, Vampire Rabbit?
Yeah, because it's a children's book, and so it's one of those things. It's like either you read the book when you were a kid or you didn't. It might have been Kenjiro who listens to the podcast who suggested it when I had asked about like what bunnies I should be for Halloween, and I had remembered liking the book a lot as a kid. But it's just about a rabbit who sucks the juice out of all the vegetables like in a family's home, and he just kind of looks like Dracula because of the way his coloring is.
Oh, I actually have a vague memory of that. I probably did read that when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's like an early reader. It's like probably like second, third grade sort of situation, and we're old now and things change with time.
I've always thought that it could be interesting to write a book like that that's for 7-year-olds, essentially.
That's like literally my mom's dream. My mom all the time is like, if I had time, I would write a children's book. And I'm like, Peg, you have time. You could do this right now. That's like a great project for this. Well, right now she's busy being grandma, I guess, since there's like 1 million babies in her house.
An abundance of babies. Speaking of bald little babies, welcome to Informed Attraction, a podcast hosted by one bull testicle and one Italian man who is not Joey from Friends.
See, I was gonna do one sheep eyeball and one bed of worms.
That works too.
Which one do you think you are if I said one sheep eyeball and one bed of worms?
Bed of worms.
You think you're bed of worms?
I want to be bed of worms.
I think you're a bed of worms.
Yay! Podcast about how sometimes the real villain is the guy who was villainous the entire time.
Sometimes the villain is exactly who you think it was. Except for that one time when he was definitely right, which we'll get into.
Yes. So, this is a 2-part series.
Okay, wait. Before Aubrey does this, I want everyone, we've just said a lot of things, but we haven't said the person's name yet. I'm going to put it in the episode title, so it's going to get spoiled. But pretend like you didn't read the episode title. Pretend like it, based on everything we've described, who do you think we're talking about? Maybe I won't put his name in, no, I'll put his name in the title, because that will be good for the algorithm. But if you had to guess, based on bald little babies, beds of worms, sheep eyeballs, and being the villain the whole time, and also being an Italian man, who do you think we're talking about? I'll give you 3 seconds. Did you guess Joe Rogan? Yay! Back to Aubrey.
This is a 2-part series about the alpha male aesthetic. Essentially, after Mackenna and I did the series about American Psycho, I really started to think more about this idea of what these sort of grind set alpha male guys tend to look like, the Joe Rogans of the world. And I find them very fascinating because I think that a lot of men who get into the alpha male lifestyle,
the manosphere, as it were.
The manosphere, yeah. They tend to change their aesthetic in such a way that it becomes really clear that they are performing an aesthetic for other men rather than for the gaze of women. And I think that that's very fascinating. So what I want to do in today's episode is talk about specifically the transformation of Joe Rogan, and then in part 2, talk a little bit more broadly about how Joe Rogan's transformation impacted an entire generation of men. So today we're going to talk about Joe Rogan's transformation from mid-tier comic and Fear Factor host to the hyper-masculine podcast overlord, and how that mirrors the broader cultural shift of how men began performing masculinity to a satirical degree, and how it stopped being funny and just became scary. Along the way, we're probably going to go into some tangents about the gym bro aesthetic, MMA cultural crossover, and what is the appeal of the alpha male to young misguided men anyway.
I have listened to, well, today I listened to 1 minute of Joe Rogan and Elon Musk talking to each other. I went to a random times stamp in the podcast and they were talking about how the internet made kids trans. And I was like, I can't listen to this, and turned it off. The only other time I have, well, there's 2 other times I've heard clips of the Joe Rogan Experience. One was a different podcast was talking about when Bill Burr confronted him about like pretending to be a COVID expert. And I was like, okay, base Bill Burr moment. And then now Bill Burr has unbased himself by performing at that weird comedy festival in Saudi Arabia. And then, right, he was one of the ones who did that, right?
Yeah, he was like the
correct?
main one.
Okay, good. I was like, wait, I don't want to be slandering. No, I'm not slandering. The other time is I was taking an Uber from a wedding to the wedding reception with a bunch of girls. And on the Joe Rogan podcast, they were like talking very derogatorily about women's vaginas. And the Uber driver, I think, wasn't maybe like just like connecting dots. And then as it kept going and kept going and kept going, he eventually turned it down because he realized he was playing the Joe Rogan podcast with 3 young women in the car while they were very like yuckily talking about vaginas. And so those are my 3 experiences with the Joe Rogan Experience, which we'll talk more about later, but that's my inroads to Mr. Rogan himself.
So you might be like, who is Joe Rogan anyway? Don't be embarrassed if you don't know who Joe Rogan is. I didn't know who Charlie Kirk was, to be honest. And I do appreciate when there are podcasts or media in the world that doesn't assume that everyone knows who cultural figures are. So this is going to be an episode that primes you into who the fuck is Joe Rogan? What was his career, and why is he, for some reason, relevant in American politics?
I also think that, like, for even people who do know who he is now, you might be like me and realize you've known him your whole life and never made the connection between who he was and who he is now, even though you have been consuming media that he was involved in your entire life.
He was always there.
He was always there.
I miss old Joe Rogan. Bring him back. Bring back Fear Factor Joe Rogan.
R.I.P. old Joe Rogan, you would have loved Turkish hair implants.
Yes. So, Joseph James Rogan Jr. is an American podcaster, UFC commentator, comedian, actor, and former television show host. He hosts the podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, which is one of the most popular podcasts in the world, and has been the most streamed podcast on Spotify since 2020.
Except for a little bit earlier this year when it wasn't anymore, but he's back now.
Who was it, briefly? Was it that one, like...
There was a bunch of them, like the Midas Touch podcast got up there. There was like another one that, it's in one of the, when we talk about the Joe Rogan Experience, I can look in the Newsweek article that I grabbed about that. But yeah, there was this era at the beginning of 2025 where he was like briefly dethroned, and everyone, you could like feel all these articles being written being like, thank God, it's finally the fucking end of this show being the most streamed thing. But like, those were all written in like February, and now in November, he's Joe back, as it were.
It's never Jover.
It's never Jover.
Joe Rogan was born in Newark, New Jersey on August 11th, 1967.
And you know what? It's like, of course he was. Of course he's from, and listen, my roommate's from New Jersey. I got a lot of love for a lot of people from New Jersey, but like, we all knew that's where he was born, you know? Even if you didn't know Joe Rogan was born in New Jersey, deep in your heart, you knew.
His parents are James Joseph Rogan Sr. and Susan Lembo, and they divorced when he was 5 years old, and he has not had contact with his father since he was 7. I have a quote from Joe Rogan talking about his dad, where he says, "All I remember of my dad are these brief, violent flashes of domestic violence. But I don't want to complain about my childhood. Nothing bad ever really happened to me. I don't hate the guy." Weird. Keeping that quote in mind, as we talk about who Joe Rogan is and what he became, I'm not saying that it's always parental issues, but it is often parental issues.
Well, I was reading this series of skeets this week about sort of like, and this is like a whatever. It's about like the relationship between like expectations of like the Republican Party of the United States and the Democrat Party of the United States, and like it was sort of like a Libby take. But the thing that I want to mention in this context is the dynamic they were talking about is this dynamic where like when you are in a situation with an abusive father, sometimes like the dad gets seen as sort of this force force and this like uncontainable thing and like not even really like a person. And then the mom, who is a human being in the situation, the expectation falls on her to manage this unknowable force. And when she fails at that, it's the problem. So it's never the unknowable force's problem. It's always the human being's fault. And so I think that, especially because he was so young, I think there's like a world in which, to Joe Rogan, his dad was just this like unknowable whirling dervish of violence. And thus it's like no fault is laid upon him because he's just an unknowable force. He's just a larger than life guy who can't contain his emotions. And it's like, he's not held to human standards.
Well, yeah, it's a natural disaster. It's a hurricane. You
Exactly.
can't blame a hurricane for leveling a city. It's just what a hurricane does.
Yes, exactly.
One interesting thing about Joe Rogan is his proximity to UFC and MMA. And I actually did not think that it was something that he was like skilled in for his entire life. I thought, okay, he must have done comedy and then he got into fighting later. He was into martial arts before he was into anything else. He started to get an interest in martial arts in his early teens. Again, a harrowing quote from Joe Rogan. He says that he was terrified of being a loser as a child and said, "Martial arts gave me not just confidence, but also a different perspective of myself and what I was capable of. I knew I could do something I was terrified of, and that was really difficult, and that I could excel at it. It was a really big deal for me. Martial arts were the first thing that ever gave me hope that I wasn't going to be a loser, so I really, really gravitated toward it."
If that quote didn't have the things in it about being terrified of being a loser, I feel like that wouldn't be like a horrible... Like, that would be like, I don't know. I mean, Aubrey, like, okay, if I said the quote was, martial arts gave me not just confidence, but also a different perspective of myself and what I was capable of. I knew I could do something I was terrified of, and that was really difficult, and that I could excel at it. It was a big deal for me. Martial arts, I really gravitated towards martial arts. Like, I feel like that's kind of a descriptor of, like, your interest in getting into Krav Maga, but the part that's like, hey, what? Is the, like, it coming from this place of, like, a fear of being a loser, that it's, like, a weird relationship to masculinity. It's the loser comment in there that's like, hey, so what the fuck's up with that?
Yeah, so I have a brown belt in Krav Maga. I really love fighting. It's something that's really special to me, and I'm really grateful for the experiences that I had while I was training. And I feel similarly, right? Like, learning how to fight made me feel really confident and gave me a different view of who I am and the things that I was capable of, and like allowed me to push myself and experience going through things that I didn't really think that I could push myself through. And that's really special, to be able to push yourself through that and to be like, whoa, like I am somebody who can do hard things. That's something that really builds confidence. And I think that I met men when I was in that space who I think that they thought that the better they could be at fighting physically, that would make everything in their life fall into place. And that's not really how it works.
No.
It does give you more confidence, and that can change the way you approach other things in your life, but like being good at, you know, a rear naked choke or a triangle choke or whatever, like that doesn't like make you not a loser.
Right.
You can just be a loser who like knows how to do chokes.
Two things on that. Thing one, I recently completed a challenge at my yoga studio where I went to 30 classes during the month of October. Please clap!
Yay!
It was really hard. It was actually genuinely very hard to go to yoga literally almost every day for an entire month. Thing two is, this is, again, I know we've brought up on the podcast before, my favorite thing about Aubrey doing Krav Maga in Phoenix, Arizona, is she got to fight Phoenix police officers, and that's awesome.
Every day. And that's the thing, like, that was so interesting about that space, because, like, I genuinely am really glad that space exists for police officers to, like, learn self-defense, because if they learn how to, you know, disarm somebody, or if they learn what to do when somebody grabs for your gun, which is things that we trained, that prevents them from their first instinct being to shoot someone and kill them.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, I think that that space is really important, and it was really productive, I think, for me to be in that space with people in that line of work, because so often, like, you know, I mean, like, I'm somebody who's against the military industrial complex. I'm somebody who is, like, very certainly ACAB. And, like, in the society that we live in, I would rather have a cop who knows how to disarm somebody without using their weapon than not having them have that space to learn that. So at the age of 14, Joe Rogan took up karate, and then he started taekwondo when he was 15. At the age of 19, he won the U.S. Opium.
He won the U.S. Opium?
Yes.
He won opium? Anyway, sorry.
When he was 19, he won the U.S. Open Championship Taekwondo tournament as a lightweight. He was a skinny man. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. Young Joe Rogan is skinny.
I don't know how old he is. For all the Googling I did about Joe Rogan earlier, I did not look up how old he currently is, so I don't know how old he was in those Fear Factor clips we were watching. He could have been in his 20s or his 30s. I don't know. But, like, it's so interesting. It's so interesting. We'll come back. We'll get back to it.
I think if he was born in 67, the Fear Factor...
Oh, he's basically my dad's age.
Yeah.
So he's
like 58, yeah. So then the Fear Factor clips were what?
He would have been in his 30s.
Yeah.
Because it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. Because he was in his 20s when he was doing, like, news radio.
Yeah. He would have been in his early... He basically would have spanned his 30s because it started in early, like, 2001 and went through, like, 2007. So, like, it would have been his basically his 30s.
Joe Rogan also practiced amateur kickboxing, and he held a 2-1 record. He retired from competition at the age of 21 because he started to get frequent headaches and he didn't want to fuck up his head or his body. Good to do.
Good to not get CTE if you can avoid it.
He did briefly attend the University of Massachusetts, but he found the endeavor pointless and dropped out early. He had no real intention of becoming a comedian, but his friends from his fighting gym and his taekwondo school really encouraged him to try out doing stand-up. He would basically do a lot of impressions and jokes, and they were like, whoa, you are so funny, you should do stand-up. And so at the age of 21, after 6 months of preparing material and practicing his delivery, he performed his first stand-up routine at an open mic night at Stitch's Comedy Club in Boston, where he started to do his career in comedy.
It's so funny. I feel like there's so many stories like that, especially, like, I have a couple friends who are stand-up comedians in New York, and so I'll go to their, like, bringer shows sometimes, which is, like, a show where you have to bring a certain number of people to perform. Yeah. And it's so often that you get men up there who I would say more often than not are a little bit older than that, who are, like, more, like, late 20s, early 30s, who are like, yeah, my buddies say I'm funny, so I'm up here. And then they say the worst shit of all time, and you're like, yes, you probably are very funny to your buddies. You are probably very funny to your buddies, but you are not funny to me. And you hate your wife, by the way.
Yeah, like, I used to do stand-up, and it would drive me crazy because I actually prepared and prepped my material, and I would go to these open mics, and it would just be a guy who goes up there and is like, so, what'd I do today? And just, like, try to describe his day in a funny way. And that's the thing.
Which is now what every podcast is.
Hey, not us.
And not many of the podcasts that we enjoy that are hosted by men. Oh, and I think also, and perhaps he might be a useful person to talk about in the next episode, like Matt Rife, I think also has created a new epidemic of dudes doing crowd work, which, like, I have now witnessed in New York, of, like, guys who just get up there and are doing, like, they're trying to do Matt Rife crowd work, and it's like, you can't do that. Most people cannot do that well. And, like, I don't even think Matt Rife was really doing it well. He was just, like, kind of good looking, and so he could, like, do the hot mom thing and people would find it funny. Like, these guys,
My hot take is that I hate crowd work. I actually think it's kind of lazy most of the time and unfunny.
Yeah.
This is why, like, when I think about Joe Rogan's career trajectory, he really did care about his stand-up. Mm-hmm. Regardless of whether you think it was good or not, I don't think his material was actually ever very good, but he put the fucking time and energy into it and was grinding.
Sure. I did not listen to any of his stand-up for this episode.
So basically, Joe Rogan's style of comedy would be what's classified as blue comedy.
Okay.
So these are, like, comedians who typically you're gonna hire for, like, bachelor parties or strip clubs.
Yeah.
It's basically comedy that's off-color vulgar, risque, indecent, profane, largely about sex, usually has a lot of profanity or sexual imagery that is meant to shock and offend more delicate audience members. So, a blue comedian or a blue comic is a comedian who performs those kind of risque routines with lots of curse words.
Right.
One night, he persuaded the owner of a comedy club in Boston to allow him to try a new 5-minute routine. At the show was talent manager Jeff Sussman, who liked the act and offered to become his manager, which Rogan accepted. Jeff Sussman is largely why Joe Rogan has a career. To be honest, the devil works hard, Jeff Sussman worked harder. The entire time I was reading about Joe Rogan's career trajectory, it was basically just people being like, Joe, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And Joe Rogan would be like, I don't know. And Jeff Sussman would be like, no, you're fucking doing this, dude. And every time it was like, now you're the host of Fear Factor. Now you're a UFC commentator. It's like, yeah. Good management means a lot in this world. So he moves to New York, and he does stand-up full-time until 1994, where he then moves to Los Angeles. Basically, my understanding is that he does this comedy special that airs on MTV, or after, I think MTV had some kind of 30-minute comedy special where they would highlight sort of up-and-coming comedians, and I think Joe Rogan had one of those, and people loved it. Executives basically go into this bidding war for who is going to sign Joe Rogan onto some show. Because he's young, he's handsome, it doesn't really matter. He's funny enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I said. When I was watching the clips of Fear Factor today, I literally was like, he looks like he should be in, early 2000s, rom-coms.
Yeah.
He's a very good-looking guy.
Yeah. When we get to Fear Factor, we'll talk more about sort of what his aesthetic is, but he looks like he would be Joey's younger brother on Friends.
Yeah.
So Joe Rogan signs an exclusive development deal with Disney, and he gets his first major acting role in the 1994 9-episode Fox sitcom Hardball as Frank Valente, who is a young, egocentric star player on a professional baseball team. Joe Rogan's talked about this essentially pilot season of this show that never took off. He called the hiring process weird. The network basically had no idea if he could act. And then he was asked by Dean Valentine, who was the then president of Walt Disney Television. And then basically Dean Valentine says, if you can lie, you can act. And if you can lie to crazy girlfriends, you can act under pressure. Acting.
I don't it's I can't even respond to that. Obviously, that is a wild statement, but it's also not shocking that a TV executive would say something misogynistic. Yeah.
One quote that Rogan said about Hardball was, "It was a great show on paper until a horrible executive producer with a big ego was hired by Fox to run the show, and he rewrote it." Maybe not. Who's to say?
It's also just shows flop like that all the time, especially back in the day. Now it's, a good show will also get canceled because HBO just wants to write it off as a tax exemption. But back in the day, things just flopped all. I remember the John Mulaney show that was on paper a good idea to give John Mulaney a show. In practice, that show was bad. Or they talk about on Last Podcast on the Left all the time, that show that Henry was on, that A to Z, that only really ended up being A to M because they only could get through 13 episodes. And so it's shows just flop.
Yeah.
Sometimes things are bad, and that's okay. And sometimes they just don't hit with the audience.
Well, that's the thing. It's not even that the show is bad. I think there's a lot of shows where I'm like, wow, this really had a lot of room to grow, but it just didn't capture the audience. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong network, bad marketing. Tons of reasons why shows don't get picked up or don't become successful. So around this time, Rogan starts performing at the Comedy Store in Hollywood, and he was hired as a paid regular by the owner, Mitzi Shore. According to Joe Rogan, he performed at the Comedy Store for the next 13 years for free, and he paid for the venue's new sound system. So my understanding of this is that he was hired but then didn't take a salary, and his proceeds essentially went to just like helping out the venue. This might somewhat track. For people who don't know, the Comedy Store is this really legendary stand-up comedy club in West Hollywood that's basically the proving ground for comedians. It was founded in 1972 by comedian Sammy Shore and his wife Mitzi Shore. By the way, these are Pauly Shore's parents, who I'm talking about. Incredible comedian. Nobody's heard of Pauly Shore. Can catch great successes such as...
Aubrey also has West Hollywood in italics in the outline, and because of a conversation on a recent episode, I really thought you were gonna sing West Hollywood. I thought you were gonna go a legendary comedy club in West Hollywood. And then you didn't.
I was going to, but
so I did anticipate what you were going to do, and then you canceled the bit.
In the moment, I wasn't sure if it would translate. So here are some of the comedians who really popped off from performing at the Comedy Store. You've got Richard Pryor, Robin Williams, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Jim Carrey, Chris Rock, Sam Kinison, Whoopi Goldberg, like huge names, especially in 90s comedy of people who perform at the Comedy Store. That's where they're really cutting their teeth, and then they just like become super famous.
Cool.
Yeah, so from 1995 to 1999, Rogan stars in the NBC sitcom News Radio as Joe Gorelli, who is an electrician and handyman at the show's fictional news radio station. Basically, news radio, workplace sitcom, takes place at a news radio station. Who would have fucking guessed based on the name of the show? Obligatory shout out to my man Phil Hartman, because this was Phil Hartman's show, and I love him. I'm always saddened that Phil Hartman is not alive.
Yeah.
I feel like I reference Phil Hartman a lot. I really have no idea how we're eventually gonna do a Phil Hartman episode. Mainly because
maybe every episode is a Phil Hartman episode, you know?
A little bit. Like, I just don't really know, because I love him, and I don't know what niche he really fills.
Maybe that's the episode, is what niche does Phil Hartman fill?
Well, I mean, it could be, because I really don't think that since Phil Hartman died, we've had another Phil Hartman type in media, because he was just like... I guess you would say he tended to play sort of like swarmy a little bit, like maybe I'm gonna do something a little malicious later, but but then
email us if you have any fan theories about that, / if you'd be interested in us talking about that more.
Yeah.
informedattraction@gmail.com.
Wow, you're doing the email plug. That's usually my thing.
I do the email plug at the end of every episode.
No, but
in the episode. I was like, I have an email call.mp3 that I put at the end of every episode.
The role of Joe Gorelli was originally set to be played by Ray Romano, but Romano was let go from the cast after one rehearsal, and then they brought Joe Rogan in to replace him. Could not find the exact lore on why they just did not like Ray Romano's vibes.
Or maybe he just they were like, oh, actually, they could have rewritten the character. They could have been like, oh, you're actually not a good fit now that we have you in with the whole cast. Like, there's lots of reasons.
Did you see any of the clips from News Radio that I sent you?
No, I can watch them now, though, if you would like.
Just go to, like, the middle of it, and then you'll get an idea for what the character is, because he's kind of the same guy.
Someone has in the comments, it's like if Joey Tribbiani finally read through all those encyclopedias.
So, how would you describe the character Joe Gorelli on News Radio?
I think that was a kind of, both of the clips I watched were about, like, this character, like, doing, like, tinkering things. Like, in one of them, he basically turns a gelato into an explosive device. And then the other one, he's talking about, like, fixing fuses, but he does it by building a machine that fixes the fuses because of the union. And so it's like, he's this, like, very Italian guy who's, like, doing his little trinketing. So he's, like, a smart himbo, if that makes sense. But yeah, mischievous. I would describe him as mischievous.
Yeah, and he's sort of laid back and cool, right? Like, a lot of the characters on News Radio are sort of uptight and neurotic, and then Joe Rogan's character is sort of the Yeah. Hey, what's going on here, guys?
Yeah, totally.
I will stand by the fact that I think Joe Rogan was the original just a chill guy until he became not a chill guy at all.
Not a chill guy at all.
Basically, when Joe Rogan was brought into news radio, he worked with the show's writers to develop the character before the show even launched, and he basically just wrote the character to be a dumbed down, censored version of himself, which is why when you watch clips from news radio, it is just Joe Rogan doing exactly what he does later on Fear Factor. Joe Rogan honestly saw acting as an easy job, and there's this quote from him where he says that playing the same character every week is boring, and that he really only did news radio for the money, and that what he really cared about was doing his stand-up, and that news radio was basically a dream gig that let him earn money while he worked on his stand-up material as much as he could. Again, regardless of whether you think Joe Rogan is good at doing stand-up or not, in the 90s he was really trying. I don't think he tries anymore, but back in the day, he really did want to be cooking.
Yeah. Do you want to skip the stuff about Phil Hartman?
I just don't know if it's super relevant. I mean, basically, Joe Rogan was good friends with Phil Hartman, and there are clips from Joe Rogan's show where he talks about how Phil Hartman would talk to Joe Rogan about his marital problems, and Rogan is like, oh, I tried to get him to divorce his wife 5 times, but he loved his kids and didn't want to leave. If you don't know, Phil Hartman was murdered by his wife, and it's really fucked up.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that Joe Rogan was aware of Phil Hartman's marital problems because they were friends, and there's tons of stories from tons of people who knew Phil Hartman who were basically like, yeah, we were all constantly telling him he needed to leave this woman, and he would not. And yeah, after his death, Joe Rogan canceled a week's worth of gigs and, was affected by the loss. He still does mention him sometimes. I saw, some clips where he talks about him, and it clearly is, the loss of a friend at a young age. It's, crazy. It really sticks with you.
Yeah. I feel like that was, when I was kind of looking him up last night. This is another Mackenna and Aubrey collab script. When I was looking him up last night, there was that was really anytime news radio was brought up, or sort of even his transition out of TV, like narrative TV into being the Fear Factor host and UFC commentating. It's often this event is often the murder is often cited as being something that really affected him and maybe sort of close this chapter as news radio closed, because news radio ended right after Phil Hartman died.
Yeah, the loss of Phil Hartman is genuinely something that I think changed the trajectory of 90s comedy in a really, I don't know, it's really difficult for me to articulate it. There's not been anyone else to me who has really filled that gap, because the way I would describe the type that Phil Hartman would play would be overly confident buffoon who's kind of all right, guys, I know how to get us out of this. And everyone is sort of playing against that, where it's he's sort of lovable, but sort of dumb, but very confident. It's a very fun kind of character that he usually plays in that way. And I'm not really sure who's doing that now. I think that elements of that can be seen in obviously the Will Ferrells, or any kind of leading comedy guy, but there was just
it's there's sort of an element of it's a little bit different, but sort of what Joel McHale's type was, but Joel's a little bit I would say wormier than Phil Hartman was, but I think there's a similar archetype there's a relationship there.
I think that's a really smart comparison, and that I definitely agree with that. I think the Joel McHale's probably a little bit smarter than what the Phil Hartman character was, but that is probably, I think, the closest one-to-one that I would make to compare the two.
Yeah.
So it's around the time in the late 90s that Joe Rogan begins working for the mixed martial arts promotion Ultimate Fighting Championship, or UFC, as a backstage and post-fight interviewer. He first started to get interested in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in 1994 after watching these fights at UFC 2 No Way Out, and he landed the position at the organization because his guy, Jeff Sussman, was friends with the co-creator and original producer, Campbell McLaren. In 1999, Joe Rogan, he starts to do these really interesting career moves. So news radio is basically
Wait, I want to read this note that you have in here because I think this is actually important.
Yeah.
He quit the UFC job after 2 years as his salary could not cover the cost of traveling to the events, which were often held in rural locations. And I think that's a thing that you often see so often in like entertainment jobs like this, where it's like, yeah, they're paying you, but then you're like responsible for your own like travel, or like the travel cost is too big. Because you see that all the time with like touring musicians. Because like, yeah, you make money from like your gigs, but like the cost of touring is too fucking expensive.
Yeah.
And so I think that like this is like a sort of an, I just wanted to like shed light on like an ongoing issue in like entertainment of like, sometimes even when you are being paid, it is not worth the travel costs. So when you see like overseas artists like cancel their tours in America, it's because touring is fucking expensive, even if you're making money off of it.
My husband was a touring musician for many years, and every tour that he went on, he lost money. And that's the thing, is touring is supposed to be how you make money as a musician. Right. And it's hard. If you go to local shows, buy those fucking t-shirts. That probably pays for their gas. So in 1999, Rogan secures a 3-album deal with Warner Brothers Records and begins tentative plans to star in his own primetime televised sitcom on Fox called The Joe Rogan Show. This is, of course, the thing that any comedian that you can think of has a show like this, where it's just the, like, what is it? The one-camera sitcom where it's just shot like traditional sitcom style, and it lasts for, like, a season and then doesn't exist anymore. Like Louis C.K. had his like random sitcom show and then went on and did Louis later. Probably could have come up with a more benign example, but fuck it. Come for fire.
I was like,
today.
I literally brought up John Mulaney earlier.
I actually kind of like the premise of the Joe Rogan show. So the idea of it was that he is kind of a fumbling sportscaster who gets a spot as the token male on a View-style type woman show. I think that actually is kind of a fun premise of like, I'm a guy and now I'm on The View. And I think that in a different world where society is not cooked, I can see that being a really charming sitcom about, like, gender and, like, you know, breaking down barriers and cross-gender friendships, and I think that could be really cute. I'm sure it was deeply misogynistic.
Also, these are multicam sitcoms. I always also forget, but it's things like Friends and stuff are multicam because they're on a stage and they have multiple cameras getting multiple shots. Yeah. Whereas like The Office is technically like a single cam.
Yes.
And that's
Sometimes I'm dumb. I didn't go.
No. It's confusing.
In December 1999, he records his first stand-up comedy album in 2 shows, and it's released as I'm Gonna Be Dead Someday in August 2000. It does very well. It gets national exposure on The Howard Stern Show and gets a ton of downloads from Napster. He comes out with a song called Voodoo Poonanny because Warner Brothers said, produce a song that could play on the radio, and he said, sure. I didn't listen to it. I didn't want to.
And I won't. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to hear the phrase voodoo poonanny in general, and I certainly wasn't ready to hear it associated with Joseph Rogan.
Around this time, Rogan's also working on ideas for a movie, for a cartoon, but the biggest thing is that he starts operating a blog on his website, joerogan.net, where he talks about various topics and basically just spitballs ideas for stand-up routines. This is kind of huge because this is like late 90s internet, kind of OG blogging. And if there's one thing about Joe Rogan that I can be like, okay, you know what, a little bit of respect where it's due, he really was like right on the cutting edge of a lot of these major like new waves of media, especially when it came to the internet.
Yeah.
One of the things that he would talk about frequently on his blog was joke theft in the comedy scene. basically there would be, comedians who are more established, who hear jokes from less established comedians, and then steal their jokes and use them in their routines. And obviously, the more established comedian is going to get credit for the joke because more people have seen that comedian.
I think people around me and Aubrey's age will remember that this is like the thing that like killed Dane Cook's career for a while, was he got credibly accused of stealing jokes. I think also Amy Schumer, same thing. Like, I think for both of them, that was sort of like career killers. And they both have made comebacks since then. But like for both of them, that was the thing that like initially like killed their comedy careers was joke theft.
Yeah. We're going to get into this more in a little bit, but one of the biggest perpetrators of joke theft, who Joe Rogan calls out, is comedian Carlos Mencia.
And if you're like me, you didn't know who that was. And then when you looked him up, you were like, oh, he was a really big deal until an event happened.
And then you never heard from him again.
Well, and I never heard from him to begin with because I was a baby.
Well, in 2001, the development of his show, of the Joe Rogan show, was interrupted after he got an offer from NBC to host the American edition of Fear Factor. He initially declined the offer because he thought NBC would not air the program because of its content, but our man Jeff Sussman says, no, Joe, you gotta accept.
Sussman like basically convinces him so that it would be good material for stand-up, that he will get like good material from stand-up if he does Fear Factor. And as I think the pattern so far has been, is like Joe Rogan really does things that will either give him time and space to do more stand-up or give him material for stand-up. That's like kind of his main motivation throughout this entire 90s, early 2000s period.
Well, that's what I think is so interesting about him, because he is so motivated by stand-up, and then once the podcast takes off, it's just no more.
Yeah.
So if you're like, hey, what is Fear Factor? Fear Factor was basically a stunt or dare type of game show. It was originally adapted from a Dutch series, which, same fucking premise. Basically, you have contestants who are pitted against each other to do a variety of stunts for a grand prize. Fear Factor runs in the US in its original version from June 11th, 2001 to September 12th, 2006, when it got canceled, and then it has a revival season in 2011 until 2012.
MTV also did a season of Fear Factor from 2007 to 2018 that was hosted by Ludacris. This is when I looked up Fear Factor on YouTube, it kept trying to give me MTV clips. I'm like, that's not what I'm looking for. And then Fox is currently reviving the series, which should premiere sometime in 2026, I think early 2026, and it's going to be hosted by Johnny Knoxville.
I'm excited for that. I really love Fear Factor. I watched it all the time when I was a kid.
I also watched it all the time when I was a kid, and now I feel kind of, after watching it today, I was like, I don't think I like this as an adult, but that's okay. It's not for me. It's not for me.
But it is for me, and that's what matters. So, contestants are forced to do things like eat bugs, hang off of helicopters, be buried alive, and usually there's 3 rounds. People, oftentimes more than one person, are eliminated after every round, and then at the very end, you have whoever is left competing for the grand prize.
Which in the first season is $50,000, and I think in subsequent seasons is $100,000.
Here's the thing that, pisses me off about reality shows now, is that when I watch reality shows from the 2000s, it's a ton ton of money, whereas now every reality show is like, you're gonna win $50,000, which is a lot of money, but fucking Deal or No Deal was giving hundreds of thousands of dollars away every episode.
And sometimes a penny.
Sometimes a penny. That is, Deal or No Deal is just delicious to watch, because you will just see what hedonism does to a motherfucker.
Yeah.
I've never seen Pain Olympics. Mackenna has a note in here asking if I've ever watched Pain Olympics.
So, this is actually surprising to me, because this was a big thing on Reddit 50/50 and was popular when we were kids, and that's what Fear Factor kind of reminds me of. So Pain Olympics was a thing from I think it was just an internet thing. I don't think it was ever on actual TV, but basically it was this thing where people were doing crazy shit, and it was specifically self-mutilation and body modification. And so it was an internet thing because it was associated with BME, zine. But yeah, and so it was often like things around like genitals and groin region. So I think the one that I remember seeing was like someone having to like stick needles into their balls and things like that. And that like to me is it was, I felt like was like the spiritual successor to Fear Factor in a lot of ways because when I was trying to figure out like a way to describe Fear Factor, I was like, oh, like reality TV is Pain Olympics, and I was like, but if you don't know what Pain Olympics is, maybe it doesn't make any sense. And I was like, no, it still makes sense because a lot of like, especially later Fear Factor was like, or even earlier Fear Factor, because like I was thinking there's an early one where it's like they're all they have to like lay in a bed of worms, and the worms are biting them, and it's like, so it's like that one, it's like it's less like can you withstand the grossness of the worms, but can you deal with these worms fucking biting you?
Mm-hmm. I really enjoy Joe Rogan's hosting style of Fear Factor. I think that on a show like that, it would be really easy to have a very, like, high octane type host who's like, yeah, welcome back to Fear Factor, motherfuckers! Yeah! And instead, the contrast that you have is that Joe Rogan's persona as a host is very, like, goading and sort of like smirking, laid back. When people start gagging or crying, he kind of just like laughs it off and is really like chill about it. It really to me gives like older brother who like kind of is gonna make fun of you while pushing you to finish the dare. Like he's always like, come on, don't give up. Oh, you got it in yourself. Come on. And then like if they do give up, he's like, you could have held out. But then when they are able to push through, he's like, that was awesome. And you're like, yeah, approval.
And it's fun because I wrote that.
Yes.
That was a note I wrote. Yeah, no, I agree. I think I was watching it today and and this is true of him now, I think that Joe Rogan benefited on Fear Factor from being good looking because I actually don't find him very charismatic. I found him charismatic actually on the TV show clip that you sent me, but on Fear Factor I don't actually find him charismatic. I think if past Joe Rogan hit on me in a bar, I would though, and so I can imagine the experience of being on set with him was very fun. I just think I don't know that like he didn't translate well for me as I maybe expected, but as an adult watching this. But like I do agree with Aubrey's point that like he is in like, especially because like this is around the same time that Jackass is happening, and so I do think that you have this really interesting contrast from the like, hey, what's up, I'm Johnny Knoxville and this is Jackass, to like Joe Rogan being like, yeah, and then you're gonna put you're gonna eat a bunch of sheep eyeballs and paraglide off this building and then get shot in the foot by a taser. And that's fine.
I love it. I really do just enjoy it. I love Fear Factor. So let's talk a little bit about what Joe Rogan looked like as the as the host of Fear Factor. We alluded to it a little bit before, you know. He's thin. Like, he's, like, when you look at Joe Rogan as the host of Fear Factor and compare it to what Joe Rogan looks like now, it does not look like the same person.
No, it was really quite shocking today when he first, I didn't recognize that he was the host at first in the clip that I was watching, because I was, expecting to see Joe Rogan, and then I saw this Italian man in a little leather jacket, and I was like, oh, and so I thought he was one of the contestants at first because I was waiting to see Joe Rogan, and then I was like, wait, that is Joe Rogan, that's the host of this show. His voice sounds different,
yeah.
And it's, yeah, he's like, I mean, he's a short king, he's 5'8", and he's like thin, like he's, he's like a small, svelte guy.
Yeah,
and he is going to come at me with a fucking gun for saying that.
But that's the thing, like, his persona in Fear Factor and his early career persona is just being a chill guy. He's thin, he wears jackets, he looks like he's perpetually kind of stoned. He never loses his cool, and I think that is such a contrast to, like, the weird bumbling man baby who we have on his podcast now.
Well, it's what it's like, listen, as someone who's dated a couple of, 5'8" guys who are, kind of bullies and smoke a lot of weed, it's like, I recognize that man as someone who, I get why he was given all of these, like I said, he looks like a romance guy from, the early 2000s, and he is very charismatic on the news radio show, and And so it was so weird to then, like, I don't know, like, I was, looking at all these comparison images, and I was like, that's just like you can see their facial structures are kind of the same, but like, I got full, like, Avril Lavigne, this is a different guy. The original Joe Rogan is dead, and he's been replaced by whatever this other frickin' guy is, because it's so weird, and the vibes are so different.
Well, and that's what gets into that thesis statement about that transformation into hypermasculinity just taking you further from what women think is attractive. And yeah, it's just young Joe Rogan is just like a hot guy and just seems like he's like nice and fun. Current Joe Rogan scares the shit out of me.
Like past Joe Rogan looks like a Twitch streamer I would watch, And current Joe Rogan is a podcast host who I hate.
Yeah. Is evil. Not literally Nazi sympathizer Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan. And like, here's the thing. He probably wasn't great politically back then either. He was just
like a libertarian. Like, his whole thing has always just been like, yeah, just be gay or whatever. Just don't stay out of my politics. Or
he also just like wasn't. I think the whole problem with Joe Rogan, which is that thing that Bill Burr clip when he's like yelling at him, being like, you don't fucking know anything about this. Why are you speaking on it? We should be listening to fucking experts. Is like so poignant because like. And I know we're gonna talk about the Joe Rogan experience, and so I don't want to belabor this too much right now. But like he positions himself as an expert, and he pretends he doesn't, but he does. Mm-hmm. He does position himself as an expert. He positions himself as someone who does research and is smart. And like past Joe Rogan just wasn't doing that at all, and it's such a weird. It is such the alt-right pipeline. It's actually unbelievable.
Well, I think the thing is early Joe Rogan was able to admit his own ignorance and sort of like laugh and play with that, where it's like, yeah, I'm just kind of a dumb guy, ha ha ha. Like, I think it's cool to listen to what people say and ask questions and whatever. And then like there's just some point where he listened to enough people that he was like, I am now the expert. And It's like, no, you're not, Joe. You never were.
No.
You're the host of Fear Factor.
You're the host of Fear Factor and a sitcom star. It's the same shit with like Ben Shapiro being like a political expert when he was like a failed screenwriter. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
I will say, have you seen that clip of Candace Owens where she's like making fun of how modern pop girlies sing now?
No.
Oh my god. It's really, it's stupid and funny. It's just like her on her podcast or whatever, and for some reason she's watching like a clip of Sabrina Carpenter, and she's like, all these girls, like, they just do that, like, whispery talk singing. Like, they're like, ooh, ah, and she does it, and it's really funny. And I'm like, you have no right to be making me give that little chortle.
Guys, we might lose Aubrey. We might be losing her.
That was a completely non-political thing that she did that I laughed at.
And that's how they get you, Aubrey.
No,
Aubrey,
I know.
You need to be careful.
It's like when everyone was like, oh my god, when Ben Shapiro talked about Wicked, it was really funny. And it's like, it was really funny, but he's evil. And we can't forget that.
Well, but it's like, with Joe Rogan.
Sometimes evil people are entertaining. Unfortunately, that's how they amass an audience.
Yes. Well, look who's the president of the United States. But that was like the whole thing with so many men I know with Joe Rogan is they're like, oh, well, like I only listen to his episodes when he has like, like self-improvement guys on. I don't listen to his political takes. And it's like, yeah, you fucking do. Yes, you do. And that's why you all like RFK now.
We have some notes about the depiction of women on Fear Factor. Typically the female contestants are dressed in more revealing athletic wear than the male contestants.
Which I think gets worse as the show goes on.
Yeah.
In the early seasons of Fear Factor, the women stay really clothed. They in one of the very early episodes when they're in the bed of worms, she has on like spandex and a full tank top and like full bike shorts. Like they're not little booty shorts. And then as I kept watching clips as the seasons got later and later, it was so many more women in their underwear and women in bikinis, and like that was such like it just really, and I think it makes sense because it's like when Spike TV was also like becoming a thing and people were just realizing like if we do reality TV in this way it'll work out, but like that was like a thing that like I literally watched evolve over time of watching a bunch of clips from a bunch of seasons of Fear Factor today.
Yeah. And then of course they do the thing where if there's all women contestants, they're like, this is a special all women episode.
Yeah, and I also think that there's like a thing of like, okay, weirdly enough, so many of the things that I watched that had like men and women in them, like the women would handle it a little bit better.
Always.
But then that wasn't really framed. But then if a woman, like the I keep bringing up the worms one, like when the girl didn't want to eat a worm because she was a vegetarian and she started crying because I think she got so overwhelmed by the idea of like breaking her vegetarianism to eat a worm. And it's like, and then they lingered and belabored that point of her crying so much. And it's like, the clip I just watched before this is 3 grown men freaking out about eating sheep eyeballs and the girls all doing it in like less than a minute. They didn't give a fuck. But then this girl is crying because she doesn't want to break her vegetarianism. Like, that's what she's crying about. She's not crying because she's scared. She's crying because it's like a deeply held belief of hers that she's being asked to break.
Yeah. Well, and this is where I think that you see threads of the alpha male performance within Fear Factor. Because the show is like, we're going to let women be tough, but it reinforces this notion that the stoic masculine norm is the standard.
Totally. Well, there's another clip that I watched that's frankly a very cool challenge on Fear Factor, but I was like, this also feels like a saw trap where there's a tank full of alligators and you had to like swim to the bottom of the tank, pick up poles, and then hang them on like a rod above.
Can you imagine being on the legal team for Fear Factor?
It was that one back to back with the stand in this room full of chemical gas and see how long you could last. And I was like, these are things that you could and the clip before that was you're locked in a tank full of water and your boyfriend has to undo all the locks to get you out. And the boyfriend can just swim to the surface, but you're trapped in this fucking tank. And I was like, all of these, like, the risk of death is so freaking high. Anyway, in the alligator one, it was all women, and the one woman who didn't want to do it, she was like, I have a kid. Like, if I, like, lose a limb or something doing this, like, that affects my ability to care for my child. And it's like, that is so fair and so reasonable and so rational, and I don't think that's, like, the tone the show is taking with it. But, like, she was just being like, hey, I got a kid. Like, I can't lose a hand because a crocodile decides to bite my hand off while I'm diving in this tank. And it was, like, it was so reasonable and so rational, but it was being framed as, like, an outrageous moment. And it's like, actually, man, like, yeah, she's got a baby, bro. Like, she does not want to fuck her limbs up. That makes sense. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's not shocking that the depiction of women on Fear Factor isn't great. But the thing I will say is that I don't think it's like as bad as some other. Like, there's not a lot of, like, you're a girl on it, which is great, but I think it is because they're like, here's how to be tough and get over your fears, which is boy shit. So there is still some, like, gendered gaze in that way, and then obviously there's just, like, literally, eventually I was like, okay, why every clip are we having girls swim? Every clip is becoming one where they're swimming, or even, like, I don't know, there were other ones where it was, like, the guys are, like, fully dressed and the girls were, like, in a tank top and shorts, and I was like, what are we doing? But it's just because it was TV in the early 2000s, and that was the norm.
When I've heard Joe Rogan talk on his podcast about, like, oh, yeah, well, people say I'm a misogynist, but when I was doing Fear Factor, I always thought the girls were stronger than the guys. The guys were babies, and the girls were so strong. And it's like, that doesn't mean you're not misogynistic.
Right, like, I mean, I agree that, like, the show often does portray that. I also think that, like, the gaze is still present, and also, Joe Rogan, everything else you say contradicts that.
Yeah.
Thinking women are tougher on Fear Factor does not negate all of the bullshit you've done throughout your career.
Should we talk about the donkey cum?
I would love to talk about the donkey cum. Wait, before we talk about the donkey cum, because that's kind of the end of Fear Factor, I think also, like, some cultural context. I brought up, like, Spike and stuff, but, like, we're post 9/11, and it's very like, we're Americans, we're patriots, we're tough, and you have all of these shows coming out at this time, which are like Fear Factor, Jackass, American Chopper, The Ultimate Fighter, which are all these, Deadliest Warrior, like, all of these shows that are about, like, fighting and being powerful and who's the strongest and blah, 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 blah. And then I think also, like, this is also the era where we have, like, pain and disgust becoming entertainment. Joe Rogan, like, thought NBC wouldn't air a lot of what was happening on Fear Factor, which is why he was initially skeptical on doing it. And then it was, like, so popular that, and off Jackass, I think, came out the exact same year as Fear Factor, maybe? And so it's like you have all of these shows that become about, like, can you do crazy, gross bullshit live on TV? And, like, I think it also introduced Joe Rogan to millions of men, specifically, I mean, to millions of Americans and people in general, but like to millions of men specifically. And like, you know, at the time, because he starts the Joe Rogan Experience, like, yeah, in 2009. And so it's like, for a lot of people, when he started the Joe Rogan Experience, he was the Fear Factor guy or the stand-up comedian they liked. And so he was this like physically confident, weed smoking, kind of a dick, but relatable. And it sort of like introduces like his specific brand of masculinity, which is like funny, self-aware, but like centered on confrontation and strength, which I think is going to lead into why a lot of men follow him down his path as he sort of becomes the Joe Rogan we know today. Anything on that before we talk about Donkey Cum?
No. Let's talk about Donkey Cum.
So it's, you know, we're getting towards the end of Fear Factor, and you might be wondering, why did Fear Factor get canceled if it was so popular? 6 seasons isn't that many seasons for a TV show, especially in the early 2000s. Well, Joe Rogan once said, when I was like on season 5 of Fear Factor, I remember thinking, I don't know how much longer I can do this. It was the same thing over and over again. We did 148 episodes. After a while, I was like, Jesus Christ, how many animal dicks can you serve people? And then on the podcast, he claimed, then we got canceled because we served people jizz. They had to drink donkey cum. So that episode is titled Hee Haw, Hee Haw, and is known on the internet as the Donkey Juice episode. In this specific, like, challenge on the show, contestants had to play a game of horseshoes. The further their horseshoes were from the stakes, the more ounces of donkey semen and donkey urine they had to drink. One poor girl had to drink 30 ounces of donkey semen. This episode never airs, but because before it is supposed to air, TMZ leaks photos, I think it's just photos, not videos. It leaks photos of it, and people are like, no fucking way. You cannot put this on TV. And according to Joe Rogan, it's what leads to the show getting canceled. Obviously, it comes back for a revival season in 2011, but like that is like the end of the original tenure of Fear Factor, and that's in 2006.
So just for context, 30 ounces. How many ounces in a standard water bottle?
Like, what do you mean a standard water bottle?
Like a plastic water bottle. Like a Dasani.
That's 20 ounces? I don't know. Maybe 16?
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
If you ever go to like a 32 ounce cup is, you know, tends to be like the largest size at like when you get a large drink from somewhere. That's often a 32 ounce cup. Like a large drinks are normally like 32 ounces.
Think about that next time you're in the drive-thru, guys.
Imagine your 32 ounce Coke from McDonald's, but it's donkey cum, you know? And it's just like, to me, and I think that's like, that gets into like my kind of issue with a lot of Fear Factor, is because I'm watching it being like, well, I wouldn't do that. Like, like as soon as they're like, okay, and then you're gonna go bobbing for apples in this bucket of blood, I'd be like, I don't want to do that on TV. Like I don't want to, maybe, I don't know. I'm not like, it's not kind of a fear thing, but it's like, I don't want to be someone who drinks 30 ounces of donkey cum on TV.
I'll do it at home by myself, thank you very much.
Somehow more respectable to me. But it's like, that's why I had so much respect for that woman who was like, bro, I got fucking kids. I'm not swimming in a tank full of alligators in my underwear and maybe gonna get my foot gnawed off by an alligator. Because I was like, yeah, man, me too. Like, I'd be like, what do you mean I'm gonna swim to the bottom of a tank with a bunch of alligators to go pay? I'd be like,
they had to have, like, the jaws, like, taped shut on the alligators, though.
I don't know.
They had to. Like, I feel like a lot of the stuff on Fear Factor was actually my hope is, because it went for so many seasons, is that I think a lot of the show, hopefully, was quite safe, but was about presenting the illusion of threat. Because you can't legally, like, there's no way they were just gonna have, like, wild alligators in the tank.
Sure, totally. And I totally agree with all of that. That is sort of not even germane to me, because I'm just sort of like, I don't know. Like, the ones where they're, like, sliding down the Luxor Hotel, like, that's kind of cool. Like, that's Mission Impossible shit. But it's like, you're dunking your head into buckets of blood looking for objects, and now you're covered in blood, and now you're the person on TV. I just am like, I don't need to do, like, I don't know. I'm just like, why do this? Like, that was my whole thing when I was watching it, is I was like, okay, so why fucking do it? And it's like, whatever. Again, it's not for me. And so it is interesting. Like, obviously the donkey semen is very gross, but like, there was other gross shit on the show up until then. And so it's like, I'm just sort of like, all of it, I'm sort of like, this is fucking stupid. So it's not... it sucks that girl had to drink all that semen and then the episode didn't even air. But also, I'm kind of glad for her that it didn't air too.
So at the same time that Fear Factor is going on, the UFC was taken over by new management, and Joe Rogan starts attending some events, and he becomes friends with the new president, Dana White, who offers him a job as a commentator. Originally, Rogan declines because he's like, I just want to go to fights and drink, but then Dana White is like, fuck it, I'll hire you for free, and I'm gonna give you prime event tickets for you and all your buddies. And then Rogan's like, hell yeah, brother. And then after 15 free gigs, he's like, you know what? Actually, I would like to be paid. And then he does commentating for UFC until the end of 2016.
I was kind of surprised at how long that lasted, but
yeah,
like for him, I just like I'm surprised he did that for that long.
I mean, I think he loves watching the fights, and it would just allow him proximity to it.
I also don't know like when in the history of podcasting, like you could really make money as podcasting full time. Mm-hmm. Like his show was already very popular in 2016, obviously, but I don't know like when it became viable to only make money being a podcast host.
I would actually probably then assume like 2016 was when it was becoming so profitable. It's like the other stuff is a distraction. Might as well just, pay for my own tickets with my podcasting money. Mm-hmm. So after leaving Fear Factor, Rogan focuses on his stand-up career and he hosts more comedy specials.
He also agreed to co-host The Man Show on Comedy Central after the original host Jimmy Kimmel and Adam Carolla left. I mostly put that in here to remind everyone that Jimmy Kimmel hosted The Man Show.
I don't know what that is.
You don't know what The Man Show is?
No.
Okay, let me tell you about The Man Show. So The Man Show is an American sketch comedy show that aired from 1999 to 2004. It was created by co-hosts Adam Carolla and Jimmy Kimmel, and it's like very much that blue humor that you were describing. And so The Man Show, like, it was like very like sexually charged. It was often jokes about like women. They had these women who were dancers who would dance in themed revealing costumes in every show. They have a name, I don't remember what the name is. And there's also like girls jumping on trampolines during it. Like it was very, very sexual. And it's like Jimmy Kimmel did blackface on it.
So common Jimmy Kimmel L.
Yeah, so like I think a thing for those who don't know who Adam Carolla is, he's like in this same vein of like a Joe Rogan like blue comedian who did the Adam Carolla show for a long time. So Rogan was hosting the Man Show while also doing Fear Factor so that's a little bit like saying this a little bit a wrong point in the timeline. He was doing the Man Show at the same time as Fear Factor. And I think like part of why it's also when Adam Carolla and Jimmy Kimmel leave the show, they're replaced by Joe Rogan and Doug Stanhope. But I really just brought this up to remind everyone that Jimmy Kimmel, who like recently became an American free speech hero, did do a lot of fucked up shit while he was the host of The Man Show. And like while I agree that ABC should not have taken his show off the air because of the Trump people being like, we don't like that Jimmy Kimmel doesn't like Donald Trump, I want to remind everyone where Jimmy Kimmel came from, you know?
No, I fucking hate this timeline. It's a timeline where I have to stand 10 toes down and defend Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah, and like also like again, like this was a show that Jimmy Kimmel was hosting until like 2002. So like obviously people grow and change in like 23 years, and this is not me saying that I think Jimmy Kimmel is the same man as he was when he hosted The Man Show. But all of the other people who hosted The Man Show are not great people. And so I just wanted us all to remember where Mr. Jimmy came from, okay?
So, as I alluded to earlier, Joe Rogan's got his blog. He's calling out joke theft, and the year is now 2007. And for anyone who doesn't know, Carlos Mencia was a quite popular in the 2000s stand-up comedian, and he had a Comedy Central show called Mind of Mencia. It was bad. I would honestly say Carlos Mencia was like worse George Lopez.
He was like worse George Lopez. He was also incredible. What I like when I was reading about him recently, people were like he was like at the time like extremely popular. People like speculate like had this hadn't happened, he would have probably had a very similar career to like Dave Chappelle. But because of this incident, like it basically like killed his career.
So essentially,
and also killed Joe Rogan's.
Yeah. So essentially what happens is on February 10th, 2007, Joe Rogan confronts Carlos Mencia in front of in front of a live audience about his history of stealing jokes while he's on stage, and he calls him out for exploiting other comedians. Joe Rogan himself films this confrontation and uploads it to YouTube, where it goes viral in a time before that was really common. I'm going to have Mackenna summarize what the video and what the confrontation is like, and then we'll talk a little. Well, you just watched it. I mean, I just said he confronts it. I mean, what stood out to you about his confronting
I don't know that I can bar by bar describe what happens, because it's just a lot of men yelling at each other.
It's just men yelling at each other.
Basically, Joe Rogan gets up there, and at first he doesn't have a mic, and he's like, you fucking steal jokes, bro, and then Carlos Mencia is yelling at him, and it's unintelligible, and they go back and forth like that for a while, and then eventually someone gives Joe Rogan a mic, and then you can kind of hear what they're saying more, and he's just like, this is what you do. He's like citing specific examples, like the really specific example he cites is about a joke that of Carlos Mencia stole from Ari Shafir. I don't know how to say Ari's last name. From another comedian, Ari Shafir, Shaffir. And he was like, he opened for you with that joke, and then you now do the joke. And then Carlos Mencia is like, Ari never opened for me. What are you talking about? And he knows the joke that Joe is talking about. He's like, do you mean this joke about Arnold Schwarzenegger building a wall in California? And Joe's like, yes. And he's like, that's not Ari's joke, and Ari's joke never opened for me. So then Joe brings Ari up, because Ari is also there, and Ari is like, dude, I, number one, did open for you on your, like, tour, I think, which you know, and B, like, I did make that joke first, and then Carlos Mencia tries to be like, you can't make that joke because you're not Mexican. Also, but also, by the way, Carlos Mencia is also not Mexican, he's Honduran, and then they go back and forth about that, because Ari is like, it's in the news, I can make jokes when things are in the news. There's another part where I think Joe is the one who calls him out for changing his name, because his name is not Carlos Mencia. His name is like Ned something, not a very Latine sounding name. And it's like, Joe, I don't really know that if that's your place to bring this up, but like, sure, whatever. His name is Ned Holness. And then they just sort of go back and forth for a while is what I remembered while watching it.
Yeah, that perfect summary.
Okay, great. Thank you. I did a good job.
Yes, you did. And essentially this...
Also, to be fair to Carlos Mencia, like, his mom's last name is Mencia, and so it's not like the name came from nowhere. In 1988, at the suggestion of the Comedy Store owner Mitzi Shore, he began using the first name Carlos to appeal to Mexican audiences. So, there you go.
Yeah. This incident essentially blacklists Joe Rogan. I'm going to be just super clear. I think Joe Rogan was completely in the right to do what he did.
The other thing that I read about a lot in, like, the Reddit threads I was reading about this was that, like, it had become a thing by the time this happened, that when Carlos would show up at comedy clubs, comedians would stop doing their, like, planned bits and would start doing crowd work, because they were so, like Carlos Mencia was so known for doing this in the comedy community amongst other comedians, that, like, he, like, literally he would show up at comedy clubs and people would be like, oh, I can't do this joke that I'm really proud of anymore, because I know if I do this joke and it gets a good reaction from the audience, Carlos, who is a bigger comedian than me, because like I said, like at the time, like he was like, you know, as big as or on his way to being as big as Dave Chappelle, and he, you know, like, people didn't want a more popular comedian. I mean, like, Ari Shafir was opening for him and he stole one of his jokes. There's another comedian who they cite in, Bobby Lee, I think is his name, who they cite in the confrontation, is like, you have seen him do comedy and you have stolen jokes from him. And they're like, he's like, I don't even know Bobby Lee. And they're like, Bobby Lee is your friend. What are you talking about? Yeah. So he's also just like lying. And Joe Rogan talked about it, and he was like, the thing that was crazy about that whole interaction is like, I think Carlos believes himself. I think Carlos believes that he's not stealing jokes from people, but he's just so fucking delusional that he can't even cop to what he's doing, because he doesn't even believe he's doing it. What's interesting about the video is the audience is like very much not on Joe's side. Yeah. The audience is very much on Carlos's side.
Well, they're there to see Carlos Mencia.
Right. And so it's such a divide between like what the audience sees, which is Carlos Mencia is telling funny jokes, and what everyone in the community knows, which is that Carlos Mencia steals jokes. And that like, and Joe like makes a really good point in when he's like, when people's music gets stolen, it makes headlines. Like, and people don't care about our jokes getting stolen by someone who is more popular than us. And like, that is a really good point, that like it does change the course of comedians' lives if like a really good joke they have gets ripped by someone like Carlos Mencia or Dane Cook, because then like then if they then make that joke, they're gonna be like, well, that's a Carlos Mencia joke, that's a Dane Cook joke. And it's like, no, that was my joke that these guys who were more popular than me stole from me. And like, I know they did it because I opened for him.
This incident causes Joe Rogan to be banned from the Comedy Store, which, again, this is a venue he had been performing at for over a decade. He is established within this community, and it's symbolic, right? Because the Comedy Store is such a place for comedians that to be banned from that venue is basically saying, like, we as a community do not rep you anymore. Rogan and Mencia actually had the same talent agency at the time, and Joe Rogan gets dropped from the agency because Mencia is a bigger act, and there's, I think a lot of discussion about who's on the right side. At the time, I think there's a lot of confusion about what exactly, like, Carlos Mencia is getting accused of. So there's people who are like, maybe this is like misunderstanding, not really sure what's happening. And to be really fair, Carlos Mencia's reputation was also basically destroyed by this. Most comedians distance themselves from both of them after this.
I think the thing that is really telling about this entire situation is the people who Joe Rogan received, like, sort of distancing from and who he received consequences from was, like, a general stand-up comedy audience and, like, the establishment who was monetarily benefiting more from Carlos Mencia than they were benefiting from Joe Rogan. Whereas comedians, I think other comedians really didn't have a problem with Joe Rogan after this.
Yeah.
It was, they had a problem with Carlos Mencia, and people were like, well, I'm not going to work with Carlos anymore. Like now this is like out in the open that he does this, and like this thing that we all have been saying for years at this point. Like now we all can be like, hey, people know about this now, so we don't want to work with him anymore. And so I think there's a reason why it ultimately takes Carlos Mencia's career more than it takes Joe Rogan's career, because like obviously Joe Rogan still has a career, it's not a stand-up comedy career, but it's because he goes this like anti-establishment route by starting the Joe Rogan Experience, and the audience follows him and the comedians follow him, whereas like when Carlos Mencia can't really work with other comedians anymore, he has nothing to do, and then the establishment stops making money off of him, and so then he fades.
I think this is a good transition into the Joe Rogan Experience. One thing that I do want to say as sort of the last note about this Carlos Mencia feud and confrontation is that humiliation and exile tend to precede radicalization. Mm-hmm. And I think that Joe Rogan was humiliated by this experience, and he was exiled by a Hollywood establishment for the most part. I think he kept a lot of friends within the comedian scene and got a lot of respect for doing what he did because he really did stand up for other comedians. But I think professionally, even though he had other comedian friends, they weren't then able to be like, okay, Joe, let me put you onto this project because the establishment was like, no, this guy is not this bad vibes. Yeah. So I think when it comes to podcasting, he leans into this arena where confrontation, calling things out, telling it like it is rewarded.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're going to start with like really the Joe Rogan Experience next time, but sort of I think the note to sort of leave it on for this time is the podcast when it started and the podcast now are very different. It's still the same general, like, you're hanging out having a conversation with Joe Rogan. Like, that has stayed the same. But, like, the vibe, what they talk about, all that kind of things has, like, really, really changed. And, like, it started in 2009. Like, Joe Rogan is a really different person in 2009 than he is in 2025. I think he also has a co-host when it starts. Like, he's co-hosting it with another comedian, Brian Redban, and the early episodes are just Brian and Joe, and then eventually they start having guests on and stuff like that. And so like next time we're gonna track a little bit like how did we go from a show that was Brian and Joe hanging out, shooting the shit and smoking weed to now it's like a big deal that like politicians are going like the most listened to episode of the show is when Elon Musk went on, and it's like, so he's having, and that was 2018, and he just had him on again this week that we're recording this, and he's had all kinds of politicians on, and like important scientists, and like his endorsement for president like means something. And so I think that next time, as we sort of track his descent into this real alpha male manosphere sort of figurehead in a lot of ways, like how that also comes with him kind of finally getting a lot of influence in a way that he didn't have before, even though when he was, the host of a very popular TV show, he didn't have influence in the same way that he does now.
And
he's not a loser anymore like the last time in the time before.
And it all started with Sober October. So drink every day, brothers.
Wait, what is Sober October?
It's the whole, like, in the month of October, don't drink any alcohol. But then, I'm going to talk about this.
That's going to make me sound like a real alcoholic. I'm like, what does Sober October mean?
I'll talk about it more in the next episode, but, like, that and, like, No Nut November and, like, that whole alpha male idea of, like, restraint as virtue, It all is evil.
Have a question or a topic that you would like for us to discuss? Send us an email at informedattraction@gmail.com.